Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls from around the world. It is once again time for the internet's favorite movie-centric list-making podcast, and to one media. Hello, everybody. I'm one of your host, Josh, joined with me, as always, by Jen.
So, just prior to the show, I was telling Josh I have gotta go make a cup of coffee, gotta go make a cup of coffee. I'm not really awake yet, I gotta make a cup of coffee. And once again, forgot how loud that intro is. I should have just waited. I would have been wide awake and everything would have been just great. Yes. However, I am very pleased to be here and also happy to have coffee with me too. Because, never enough coffee.
Fun fact: as I pressed the button, I remembered. I took off my
It was
headphones. I was like, "Oh!" Took off my headphones real quick. Like,
loud.
haha, I win this time, computer.
My headphones have these cushions on them. I don't know how to describe them. They're these pads, right? And you stick it over the actual headphones, and it to me it sort of like muffles the sound just a little bit so that it doesn't hurt my ears so much. I'm a kid of the 80s. I went to plenty rock concerts and I'm pretty sure I gave myself permanent hearing problems. So every once in a while I forget that these things are on, and I always think that like the earphones are supposed to sit really like close, hug my ears, and I'll push on them and the little things on the headphones stick on my earrings. When I want to go take my headphones off quickly, I cannot because they're stuck on my earrings. So, we all have our problems. And that's definitely, I would say, up there. I can't even do a podcast without taking headphones off quickly. That's not possible. We'll have to do something about the volume of that for sure.
Yes, eventually.
I mean, yeah, we could also just let people wake up. That's also another thing. Hey, this was really a funny intro, wasn't it? No, not really, but I am definitely excited to start talking about the funny movies.
Funny.
Yes. Some of the, yeah, I'm so embarrassed. I am so flippin' embarrassed that I said last week, I was like, oh, haha, you could think Guess Who's Coming to Dinner is kind of like a comedy from the 1960s. And I was like, but, no, that's not really a comedy. But, then I was looking just to get an idea of kind of like what other people were saying out there. And guess what was on every single flippin' list that there was? Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? And so now I feel really embarrassed. I am so sorry. I did not mean to do a bad by that movie. I absolutely honor it for being funny. It is funny. I
Well,
just
yeah,
didn't
a lot
think
of things are funny, and
it's labeled a comedy, and I never even knew it.
what I did was, as per usual, I went to letterboxd.com, give us money, and sorted the movies into, because they have wonderful filtering tools. I said movies of the 1960s, and then I went over and clicked comedies, and all of the ones that I had seen were already kind of, darkened a little bit. So it was easy for me to compile my list because it shows me what I've seen already. But what surprised me was, wow, there's a lot of a lot of things on here that are considered not necessarily like this is just a comedy or anything like that, but I don't know. It's like if there's a joke in there, they're like, let's throw the comedy tag on there. It's thriller slash comedy. It's it's a horror uh, comedy, and it really kind of makes you think some of the people putting the tags on here might be playing things a little loosey goosey.
They have a sense of humor. I mean, I don't know. I actually have a movie on my list which is not supposed to be horror, but it deals with a horror topic, and it also is definitely labeled comedy. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know how they decide these. I really don't. I mean, what does one joke make it a comedy, or two jokes, or three jokes, or what's your take?
I I've got nothing, man. Um, the like the number two highest rated comedy. Uh, no, I'm sorry, number two most popular. So I guess it's the number of people that have watched it and logged it on Letterboxd is, I don't know if I would consider it like a comedy, but there it is. Um, I don't want to say it because if it's on your, it's not on my list, but if it's on your list, I don't want to.
Well, if it's on my list, I won't tell you, but go ahead.
All right. Like The Graduate.
No, that's not on my list. And I'll tell you why it's not on my list. Not that I don't think it's a great movie, because I do. I don't feel like it's a comedy.
I don't feel like it's a comedy either.
How
I
did
mean,
see?
it's got some humorous moments, but I don't want to say it has funny moments. And there is a
Uh,
difference.
yes, I completely agree. There is a difference.
So yeah, that kind of immediately jumped down at me as, wait, what, comedy? I mean, it's like the greatest soundtrack of all time, but is it a comedy?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is like it. Like, where do we, like, the movie that's on my list in question? I think I can understand why it's a comedy, and in some ways it's actually a lot more satire than laugh gag comedy, like slapstick or anything like that, or even just really 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 funny laugh out loud jokes. But at the same time, I've always wondered this about a lot of genre designations. Where do you draw the line? And with comedy, it becomes really difficult. It feels almost opaque to try to see through the whatever that boundary is between, okay, here's a drama with jokes, and yes, it's funny, but it's still a drama, and here's a comedy. Where do we draw the line? Because yeah, and I mean, in this, I I I live for movies. I watch a lot of movies. I have watched a lot of movies over the course of my lifetime, and I'm still, even at this age, very perplexed by the designation of genre, and where those lines in between are. And I have to say, recently there's been a lot more sort of genre bending, with comedy horror, and different kinds of, hey, let's see what we can do with these different tags and designations. And I'm confused about why that is. Like, I really don't quite understand where that's going, but it's interesting.
Well, with that being said, we each have a list of comedy movies from, one of the least eventful eras in American history, the 1960s.
Yeah, there really wasn't much going on, was there? Not at all.
Very, very calm,
Yeah,
known for its tranquility.
muted almost.
Hmm.
And certainly nothing amazing happening in film. I mean, of all the eras, it was just so quiet. Yeah.
Very, very quiet. Of course, it wasn't that.
Can't even say that with a straight face.
It it was a tumultuous time,
I
to
was
say the
just going
least.
to use that adjective. That absolutely is the one that comes to mind. Yes. Tumultuous.
Between the Vietnam War, civil rights, um, women's liberation, it was, you couldn't throw. What do people throw? I don't know what people throw.
What do you mean?
Do you throw a cat? Like you can't throw a cat without hitting something, right? That's what people do.
Oh, is that what they do? Oh, okay.
I don't know. I don't throw things.
Are you looking for a turn of phrase, or are you looking for a specific?
Turn a phrase.
I honestly don't know. When I think of the 60s, and I've got a mom who was, granted, she was, super young, like she was not even a teenager, I don't think, but she was at the March on Washington when Martin Luther King spoke. So she heard a lot over the course of her lifetime. And when she talks about the 60s, she talks about everything from the 60s as basically being one giant Molotov cocktail that was just at all times ready to go in a billion different directions. There were things happening on college campuses, there were things happening that were both civil unrest and domestic sort of malcontent. Oh, it's starting to sound like maybe we're repeating the 60s. That's weird. No, actually it's not, because we don't have the same kind of unrest and true sort of upending of civil norms that we had back in the 60s. And it really, it affected art in a way that when we look back on it now, it brought us some of the best art cinematically that we had seen both up to that point, and also yeah, it took a long time for movies to kind of catch their breath again and start making films that rivaled the films of the 1960s. So it was a big period. And amazingly, a lot of the movies and comedies, truly comedies of the 60s, maintain their staying power. I mean, there's comedy that I think is way out there, and we wouldn't tell these jokes today because we said this before, a different time. It existed in a different era. Um, but the movies themselves have really stayed the test of time. And that's not the same for a lot of movies. A lot of movies are very completely forgotten because they just didn't have any staying power.
Yeah, completely agree. And I really don't have much to add to that. So it's been a great episode. Oh, right. The lists. The lists. Can't forget about the list. So who do you want to start off? Do you want me to?
Up to you. What would you like? Would you like me to go? You want to go? Last week you went first, so how about I'll go
So this
first this
week,
time?
ladies first.
All right. Okay. So we're gonna run through the bottom five, and then we'll slow down a little bit with the top five, and give a little bit more interesting detail on our top five picks. So my bottom five start with Doctor Strangelove. I struggled with this so hard. I will tell you that I really wanted this in my top five, but my top five happens to be a fairly specific grouping of movies. And with this list, I'm also going to say I tried to come up with a little bit of something from each of the categories that I really like, because it's such a diverse pick. There's so many different pieces that go into the comedies of the 60s. So I wanted to kind of get a big representation. Okay. So Doctor Strange Love gets my number five. I'm sorry, number 10. Number nine, The Parent Trap. Huge fan. Number eight, The Pink Panther. Number seven, this is the one that I was kind of on the fence with. It's called The Fearless Vampire Killers. It was a film. I'm not going to get too far into it because I know this is my bottom five, but it was a film by Roman Polanski. And it was one of the only films by Roman Polanski that was horror comedy. And yeah, this film was actually adapted into a musical of all things. So super interesting. It's got some very fascinating history behind it. But yeah. And then my number five pick is, or I'm sorry, my number six pick is Mars Needs Women. And that movie in particular has sort of been redone done under some various different other ideas into movies, but Mars Needs Women was an exceptionally awesome idea. So that's my bottom five.
Well, let's see. I guess it's time for my bottom five.
Your bottom five.
Okay, here we go. My number 10 is The Ladies' Man, 1961 Jerry Lewis film. Number 9, in case you've been a long time watcher of, Wildco Media stuff, as well as Jen's contributions to Wildco Media stuff, you'll recognize uh, How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. It had some of my favorite dance numbers of the 60s in that one, especially the big office dance, which was borrowed from when I made the opening sequence for, what was it? It wasn't TV dinners. It was,
Oh, when we did the movie one, the movie podcast one.
yes.
Oh,
And I was making all those
yes, yes, yes,
specialized
yes.
openings.
That was so fun. We had a good time with that.
I still have that video and I watch it every once in a while. I'm proud of that one.
That's great.
My number 7, strangely enough, is also one that I was like, I don't know if I'm going to get away with this, but it's got the tag. 1963 Charade
Oh,
from yeah.
that's an interesting one.
It's again, it's intriguing. It's, it has humorous parts, a lot of humorous parts, but I don't think humor was like the end all be all of the storytelling devices.
No, it's definitely way more thriller-esque.
Yeah.
Yes.
And my number 6 is um, an apt title for maybe the way things are currently going in the world. It's a mad, 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 mad world.
I almost put that on this list, but didn't quite make it.
I almost made it higher just so I could talk about how it was a great precursor to things like Cannonball Run and Rat Race.
Mhm. Yeah,
But that's my
definitely.
my bottom 5, and
Nice.
that takes us to the top 5. And you can get us started with your
Okay.
number 5.
All right. So my number five is a movie that I actually really, really love. Like this is, well, actually, the entire top five of my list are movies that I regularly watch. Um, and that kind of says something because there's a lot to choose from right now. So the fact that I go back to some of these movies, I think says something about both their staying power, but also just how much they resonate. This particular one is called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. Now, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum is also musical in nature. And it's one of those really interesting movies that it's just glorious. There's nothing in this movie that sort of like stands out to me as being the moment when the movie is like, oh, this is what makes it so wonderful. It's more like everything adding up makes it wonderful. And now this is the adaptation to the original stage show, which came obviously before. It has Buster Keaton in it, who, if you don't know who Buster Keaton is, definitely look up Buster Keaton because, yeah, that's pretty iconic. And there's something about this movie that it's funny. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's hilarious, but it's funny and it really makes you think. There's something about the humor here that is a little bit more, it's deeper than just the comedic, the timing, the quick one lines, the uh posturing. There's something much deeper about the humor here that kind of gets you thinking about other topics. And a lot of this has to do with um what is freedom, a little bit of what does it mean to sort of think for yourself. Um, and there's a whole power dynamic in a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. E- In terms of why I think that this is such a good fit, right? This particular movie took the adaptation of of the screen, or I'm sorry, of the stage show to the screen and made it fit so perfectly. And the humor is simply a part of the story. It's not like the humor is added in. It's not like it's funny because one or two things happen. It's funny because the entire subcontext of this story is hilarious. Um, I there's something endearing about the performances in this particular movie too that just make you go, "Whoa." These people were really, really, really talented. And also, I have to say that as a musical, um, I can't not sing these particular songs. They're just amazing. So anyway, I won't go too far into it because I know that this is only number 5, but uh, this one really has a lot to offer. And I guess if I had to sort of summarize everything, it is absolutely, it sets place, or sets place. You know what? I think I need more coffee. It takes place in ancient Rome. And when I say ancient Rome, I mean like there really isn't a lot of. I don't think, I can't remember anything specific that says, oh, hey, it was during this time or that time. It's more like, oh, okay, well, here's ancient Rome vaguely. But all the things that we expected about ancient Rome are kind of put in here. There's slavery, there's um Praetorian, there's, the Roman army as it is. Um, there's a bunch of things, but then there's also this sort of biting social commentary, which I think fits perfectly with the 1960s. And it's the direct comparison to what they were experiencing during the 60s and sort of bringing it forward by saying, see how this looks if you just look at this with fresh eyes. Um, that critical free thinking is absolutely important. So anyway, okay, I just said I wasn't going to go into it, but I did. A funny thing happened on the way to the forum is my number 5 pick.
I still haven't seen that. It's been sitting in my queue probably since the '60s.
Wow. Well, since you weren't born in the 60s, that's really, really, really amazing. I'm super impressed. Very
I'm a man ahead
impressed.
of my time. What can I say?
This particular movie won. Okay, so the Broadway production won a bunch of Tony Awards. I mean, like, really won a ton of. And then there was a revival in 19 mid 90s sometime, and it was nominated for more Tonys and stuff. But the movie didn't really get any awards, right? It wasn't nominated for anything. It didn't like rise to that occasion, but just to see Buster Keaton in this role, it definitely is worth some pretty big accolades. And to hear everybody sing, yeah, that's a treat. That is a treat. So, yeah, like I've seen films of the Broadway productions, especially of the 19 whatever, the mid 90s revival, and they're astounding. I mean, they're just unbelievably great. But if you want to see something with more of like a visual narrative to it, then definitely the 1966 movie is the way to go, because it ties things together that the stage play doesn't exactly do the same way. So definitely worth it. It's worth it to see both, I think.
Well, coincidentally, my number 5 has a stage element.
Oh,
You can find some of this performed at the time on stage.
is it a musical?
No,
Oh,
not exactly.
the very first three of my top five are basically musicals.
It's got heavy elements of music,
Okay.
but it is, we'll say, a documentary, but it's not.
A documentary comedy. Okay, this I have to
I
hear
said,
more about.
but also it's not.
Come on, we could totally come up with a brand new genre.
We could something that mocks a documentary. What could that be called?
I mean, no, not a mockumentary. No, not that.
Okay, enough dilly dallying, I suppose, because in 1964 we got to see a glorious behind the scenes look at the greatest band of all time, the Beatles,
Oh
in
yes.
a little film called A Hard Day's Night. And I know what some of you are thinking, especially if you haven't seen the movie. Well, why would this movie about the Beatles, who were playing the Beatles,
Oh
be on the
man,
comedy list? Because
it was so
it
funny.
is a comedy. It is absolutely a comedy. It's definitely, you know, my dad, when he saw me watching this movie, was like, "Oh yeah, it's about the Beatles. That's how they were." I was like, sorta, sure. Um, that they were playing slightly fictionalized versions of themselves. It's not like, Paul's grandpa was really running around with him or anything. Um, it is a wonderful. It it's like it's not a documentary, but it's kind of fashioned as one in a kind of a day in the life style. But it's also got enough guidance to just be completely scripted. I don't. It's really hard to explain a hard day's night. It's
It is. It's I think the best way to describe A Hard Day's Night is the Beatles do a caricature of themselves.
That's a great way to put it. That the Beatles do a character of themselves with actors surrounding them, and
Yes.
it almost feels like I read one review that said, I think put it very well. This movie was a series of memes before there were memes.
Yes. That's a great way to say it.
There is a through line that is just a tad bit more than what the fellows are up to in a particular day, but it does sort of rely heavily on more vignette moments, and the boys and the Beatles just kind of being. I saw this word tossed around a lot, irreverent, in the
Hmm.
time, and just being in the world, chased by fans, and trying to have a day filled with a lot of really good, one-liners as the older generation interacts with them. Um, in the grand scheme of things, I guess you could say it's very much a representation of the youth culture of the time and how it kind of actively went against the older generations, but not in a hostile way.
Right.
It's
It,
it's
it it was okay boomer before okay boomer was kind of a thing, right? I think that the take was definitely felt exactly like that.
Yes,
Yeah.
they had uh, an answer for everything, and sometimes it was just nonsense, but sometimes it kind of reflected more than just one person's opinion. It seemed like this line is I'm speaking for a generation, even though it's not. If that makes any sense whatsoever.
It definitely does.
There was one line that I wanted to bring up. I had it in my notes here. I had notes. How about that?
Ooh.
Uh, the an older guy said, like, uh, "I fought in the war for you," or something like that. And I think it was Ringo that was like, "Well, I bet you're sorry you won." So it's that kind of British dry wit, um, a knock against the previous generation, but very inoffensive
Yeah.
in their delivery, and that's sort of what made the Beatles so great. This isn't a music podcast, and I'm not going to keep going on and on about this one. It's my number five, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention that when it comes to their music and the things that they, you know, a lot of people talk about, well, the music had hidden meaning, right? It had all of these messages, and it's like, no, it was very kind of in your face with what the meaning was, and uh, it was it is definitely hard to believe that the kids that would listen to the music then and still listen to it now still don't understand what the music was about. And especially for those that are like listening to John Lennon solo stuff, where they're like, "I hate this," and it's like, "But you love John Lennon. How does that compute?" Anyway, because that's a diatribe for a whole other show. The point is, Hard Day's Night was brilliant for the time and does something that's difficult to do for these very moment in time type movies. It holds up extremely well without being held down by the times it was made in. So, number five, The Beatles, A Hard Day's Night.
It's so funny because of not to get too far into the weeds on this, but I do think it's worth a little bit of exploration of all of the media assets, if you will, that sort of did the crossover between movie and TV culture and big music names. The Beatles and the Monkees to some degree, but definitely the Beatles seemed to capitalize the best on this particular moment in time. And the Beatles did a number of really funny things, like Yellow Submarine comes to mind, which was 1968, I think. And the movie is sort of like directly based off of the song, and it has other songs in it too. But it's just ridiculous. It's totally ridiculous. It is such a moment in time to capture. In fact, after Hard Day's Night, Help came out, and Help is just as silly, but it was so fun. It was such a comedic break to the things that were the most intense and happening at the time. I mean, Help is basically about Ringo being abducted by that cult because some fan sent him a ring. And it's hilarity ensues, and it was all based around really excellent music. And that there is something about what they were able to capture in the 1960s, which really hasn't been well replicated by any other band, um, to the degree, to the level of success that the Beatles had it. So I think it definitely deserves a spot on our list. I'm really glad that you chose that. Very
Thank you.
good job. Yes. Um, okay, so my next movie is another, well, okay. So it's a musical in the sense that there's a lot of music in it. I guess I don't know if I would call it a musical, but it definitely has some of the most iconic music that I can think of that still withstands pop culture's rather corrosive way of trivializing past decades, and especially sometimes infantilizing music that came before the music that we listen to now. We always love to think that our own music is so much more sophisticated, or so much more has so much more depth, or is something, different and special. And every era has that. Every era has something amazing. But I have to say that this movie definitely still captures the heart and soul of children everywhere. It's Mary Poppins. As a comedy, Mary Poppins is, I think, one of my favorite children's stories of all time. It just absolutely has something significantly um, astounding to offer. It's both pure imagination, sorry, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, um, and it has this level of intricacy between children and adults, which sometimes we don't always quite understand, or we get to be past a certain age and we stop thinking about what it means to be a child and how magical the world can be. And one of the reasons that I love Mary Poppins is because the adults, other than the children's parents, until the very end of the film, are completely unaware of the magic all around them until Mary Poppins comes into the picture, and then they can see it. But there are other people in the film who have never lost their ability to capture the magic, and it makes the world a fun and comedic place. It gives the world a depth that no other sort of magic can recreate and capture. And one of my favorite scenes that kind of, plays this out perfectly is the tea party on the ceiling. It's funny, and the humor is what makes the tea party on the ceiling work. Literally, you have to laugh in order for everything to work. But Mary Poppins has so much internal magic that she doesn't need to say it outright. She can just partake of everybody else's magic, and be at home with it. I don't know. There's something so surreally beautiful about it. Popping into chalk drawings is also another one of my favorite sort of tropes, because it's entering the magical world, but they enter the magical world and the rules of their world. It's not just that they don't apply, it's that they have to adjust to what is happening in the magical world. And then they have to face the realism that it doesn't last forever. That, like the rain on chalk drawings, everything has a time and a place. They have to come back. The humor in Mary Poppins can be so subtle and so wonderful. Um, and then, in a moment's notice, you've got Dick Van Dyke doing rather uh, slapstick things, not quite slapstick comedy, but, the way that he can move his body is just unbelievably, it's just amazing. And the entire scene with the chimney sweeps is just, it's a testament to both awesome choreography, really well developed timing, and a sense of this comedy that is not it's a satire. It's like a social satire about there's a whole different world living just above where you are. The fact that they're above the upper class is, let's just say that I love that. But there's something thrilling about all the messages in Mary Poppins, and they manage to do it in a way that is still funny to this day. So my number four choice, I have to do my counting. Um, I really should number my list. That would be much more helpful. Is Mary Poppins. So that's my number four choice.
Did you say Mary Poppins?
I may have. Also, okay. Tell me what do you think about Mary Poppins? Do you like it?
Oh, I think it's a great movie. I'm also one of the 5 people that enjoyed the sequel.
You know what? I really enjoyed it too. I think my love of the original material actually just helped me to see it for what it was, and I wasn't looking for, Mary Poppins 2.0. I was looking for, well, what happens after?
I also enjoyed that guy.
Yes, but since he was not, I don't even think he was around in the 1960s, was he?
No, he's
Is
like
he
a
a
year older than me.
Yeah, I
And we share
don't
the same
think he was.
birthday. By the way, for those of you just listening to the audio, I threw up a picture of Lin-Manuel Miranda. But you weren't going to be able to get out of this segment without me doing a Mary Poppins. That wonderful Dick Van Dyke English accent.
So this segues perfectly into something that I was thinking about when I put this whole list together, and Mary Poppins came up on my list, right? And that is that the accompanying star power of the 1960s is something that is just a force to be reckoned with. Dick Van Dyke's career lasted for decades, and he's he had this beloved aspect to him that is like you can't break that. When you look back on the collection of Dick Van Dyke works from the 1960s and even moving forward out of the 1960s, um, the body of work that he did was just absolutely astounding, just astounding. And from a comedic standpoint, oh my god, I mean, this man was a genius. His timing is everything. I just if you go back and you watch the original Dick Van Dyke shows, you'll get a really good feel for what I mean. I can hardly believe that that was all scripted. Sometimes I think that there had to have been so much improv going on, just because the timing is just so well done.
Well, I mean, it was a Carl Reiner joint.
Yes, and the fact that Dick Van Dyke works on a comedy show is also like it was meta before meta existed.
It was
Loved it.
so popular. It made such huge stars of Dick Van Dyke and Mary Tyler Moore that when Mary Tyler Moore got her own show, um, she was originally
Yes.
going to be divorced. But they're like, but people are going to think she left Rob. We have to change
Oh,
that.
good point. Wow, you know what? I didn't even think of that. Yeah,
Yeah, that was a
that's true
whole
though.
thing. Um, yeah, so Mary Poppins one. It almost made it onto my list. I got to be honest with you, but uh, I was going for like a more serious approach to my comedy,
Oh, I see.
which is exemplified. If I may read to you a bit of dialogue
Yes,
from my number 4.
please do.
Okay, let's see if you can figure out what it is based on the dialogue here. Here we go. It could be any one of them, but which one? Which ones? Pretty fishy. What happened to be on that ladder? You mean where there's a fish, there could be a penguin? But wait, it happened at sea. C. C for Catwoman. Yet an exploding shark was pulling my leg. The Joker. All adds up to a sinister riddle. Riddle. Riddler. Oh, the thought strikes me so dreadful I scarcely dare give it utterance. The four of them, their forces combined. Holy nightmare! Scene. That was from the one and
Batman
only.
versus the shark.
Hardly a battle since he had that handy patch shark repellent.
Oh,
That was. Hope you enjoyed that reading. That was from the 1966 Batman film.
With in the days before CG, when real props sort of before the days of us going, oh, and they use practical effects, because the practical effects really were ridiculous. And
Mhm.
the shark on the ladder, yeah, really sort of drives that home. It was so bad.
Today they'd be like, "How did you fake that Batcopter?" Back then they were like, "Hey y'all, we built a Batcopter." It was. I mean, come on, let's face it. Batman 66 is the greatest Batman movie of all time because it's the only movie that dared bring the Penguin, Catwoman, and the
Riddler.
Riddler. And it brings them all together to team
Right.
up against the Caped Crusader and the Boy Wonder. Never has it been done again, and it is truly the ultimate superhero film. And I'm not even going to digress or backpedal because Adam West is how does a man that takes his craft so seriously become such an icon in this type of environment? Is it because he takes it seriously? Maybe. It's kind of like Shatner on Star Trek,
Yeah.
they have their way of doing the same era too. And it is I'm not Batman 66 is almost indescribable. Which is unfortunate for me being one of the hosts on a podcast that's supposed to describe these things. Because you see, it is every bit a mystery, um, every bit a hero film, and every bit a complete farce because nothing in it is taken seriously, but except every actor in it takes it completely seriously. It's like they're not in on the joke, and that's what kind of makes it work so well. And I don't just mean that in a, it's a sign of the times kind of deal, like we've talked about several times. It's the fact that um, everything is so over the top and played straight at the same time that it holds up as a great just comedy in general. Um, from the bad shark repellent to the the absolutely ludicrous lines of dialogue that I read where they connect the dots that didn't exist to
That was so great.
the bad guys, even down to running around on a dock with a giant, like cartoon looking bomb in your hands, and you Batman goes one way, there's like school children. He goes another way, there's a group of nuns, and he just like stops and says, "Some days you just can't get rid of a bomb," and that's so great. Um, if you haven't seen Batman 66, why not? it is classic, especially if you love Batman, especially if you love superheroes. It's always a good idea to take a look at where these things stemmed from, what the origins are. Batman, being one of the greatest heroes of all time, is exquisitely portrayed in this. And mind you, I know everybody now is like, but I like my Batman dark and brooding. It's like, okay, yeah, that's sort of what Batman is now. But in 66, that Batman didn't really exist yet. So
No,
this
no.
was beautiful. It was full. Batman cooperates with the police. Batman does everything basically with approval of, you know, the city, and goes out of
Batman
his way to help old people.
Batman is the funny version of Superman. From the superhero standpoint, like we've actually gone full circle here, because in the '60s, Batman was uh, kind of a genre foil almost to the Superman shows and movies, which were far more serious and you know, constructing that. Well, I guess a little bit harder edged is maybe the way that I would say it. But there was no co- part of what made, I think, the Batman, especially the '60s version of Batman, part of what made it so exciting was it had this sort of unpredictability to it that was hilarious because it was so unpredictable. I think sitting here in 2024, looking back at the '60s, it's easy to I hate to use this word again, but it's easy to infantilize the humor of the '60s and say, well, that was just look at how silly they were back then. None of that humor can fly now, and we're so much more uh cultured, and our humor has to be a certain way. And I completely and totally disagree. I feel like that is completely not the that's not where the humor of the '60s made its mark. What we had different standards for humor for sure, but what makes it work is that the at the time, the culture itself played such a huge part of the comedy, and it is a perfect reflection of that balance between what was strife and what was sort of the craziness, and take a beat, take a break. This is what we've got. This will set you at ease. Everybody can come together around something funny like Batman. I just Also, if I could just interject one quick thing. Adam West was one of the most prolific actors in Hollywood, just ever. He did so many voiceovers. He did so many uh guest star appearances. He did so many um recurring role pieces. Um I, e- there, if you name a show, there's hardly a show between the 1960s and like the 1980s that Adam West wasn't a part of. It's just it's crazy because we just don't have people like that anymore. We don't have actors who fit those one size fits all kind of roles because I don't know why. Actually, I shouldn't say why I think that is. I don't know, but he had everything. I mean, just everything. He did westerns like The Big Valley. He did the he did the Milton Berle show. He did some kind of sci-fi thing, which now I can't remember exactly what it was. Something with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I think. But then, I mean, he did things like there was this show called Love American Style, which I remember seeing him on. Things like that. Just, I mean, he was not afraid to correct. So awesome choice. Really awesome choice.
Before I close it out, I want to add just this bit of conjecture here, or is it speculation? This additional bit in the what was it? The Justice League movie.
Hmm.
Flash meets Bad Flag meets Bruce Wayne specifically, and he's like, "What's your superpower?" And you know, the response is, "I'm rich." It's like, okay, sure. And I enjoyed Bad Flag, and as much as I rag on those Snyder films, it's like I enjoyed Bad Flag. But if Adam West was asked that question, if the Flash said, "What's your superpower?" he would say, "I'm Batman," and
Yeah.
that's all it would take.
Yep.
So, Batman 66 is my number 4.
Such an excellent choice. And what a wonderful stroll down memory lane. Because, yeah, there was some, yeah, we could do a whole list just on Adam West and we wouldn't even have to repeat anything. He just had an amazing career. Makes me sad that I didn't choose some Adam West. Um, all right. My my next movie choice, which is my number 3 position here, is a movie that most people know because there was a 1980 something. What was that? Now I'm gonna have to go look it up. 1986, I think. I'm thinking it was 1986. Pretty sure. I'll look it up. There was a 1986 remake of this movie that absolutely had the world captivated because Rick Moranis was the best Seymour that there ever was. But back in 1960, the movie Little Shop of Horrors was made, and it follows the same basic storyline as the musical The Little Shop of Horrors. But in the 1960s version, first of all, it's a little bit darker. It's funny. It is very funny, but it is definitely a bit darker. You don't have the same I guess a good word for this is you don't have the same comedy that comes through in the music because this isn't the 1960s version wasn't a musical. There's something about though the the story here, which is pretty ridiculous. If you know the story of Little Shop of Horrors, you know that Audrey too is a plant. Seymour finds it when he is looking for plants, and there's a comet that passes, and it basically is an alien. Um, but the plant only thrives when you feed it human blood. So there's some pretty nefarious things that happen with Seymour, and what he decides to do, both with uh, the owner of the shop, Mr. Mushnick, and his blossoming love affair with his girlfriend. How much to tell, how much not to tell. Um, you know, Obviously bodies disappearing make things a little bit more complicated for everybody. Um, the, if you really, really listen to the dialogue in this, though, it is definitely just one of the best sort of sublime humor pieces that you can find. It's really, really, really well written. I personally, I happen to love the 1980, the mid 80s version so much because of the music. It actually makes the movie for me. But to watch the story unfold um without that, there is something. different. Like you come away with a different feeling about what was really going on in the first place, like, who the what the character motivations really were. And it does a really good job of fleshing out the characters, whereas the 80s version, it's a little bit quick. The character arcs feel like they are moving really fast, and in the 60s version, it's a little bit slower, and so you kind of get to know Seymour just a little bit more. Notably, in the 60s version, Seymour lives with his mom, and it's that's complicated. That's very complicated because mom does not like Seymour's choice in women. So yeah, there's that. That's sort of interesting. Anyway, I absolutely love the very end of this, because in the end of the original Little Shop of Horrors, well, the 60s version, um, rather than having the little Audreys that pop up on the lawn at the end, uh, basically, the last scene is the last bud of Audrey opens and it shows Seymour's face. So things happen obviously in between there, but I feel like that made the movie a little bit, that's what made it so dark. It was just, yeah, there's some crazy stuff that goes on there. It's amazing. It's an amazing movie. And like I said, the humor is so just like always under the veneer, always just sort of like not outright hilarious, but just like, oh yeah, that actually is funny. Um, I really think that it deserves a mention in the top 5 of movie comedies for the 1960s, because it was so intelligently put together. I really, really, really love this movie. So Little Shop of Horrors gets my number 3 choice.
I haven't seen that particular version of it.
Really?
I watched, Rick Moranis, Steve Martin all day.
Yeah, that a lot of people have seen that. And actually, a lot of people have seen Little Shop of Horrors done in one way or other as a musical presentation, either in a, on Broadway or off Broadway presentation. It's pretty popular to do. And it's pretty simple. I don't mean the story is simple. I mean, it's a simple production to put together. So there's, it kind of lends itself well to being done. But the movie added a different element to this story, which, if you like Little Shop of Horrors, you should watch the 60s version. Um, because it's different. It's definitely different. It's the same story, but it's got lots of different elements in it, and it makes it really, really interesting.
But I love Suddenly Seymour.
Yes, that is definitely a phenomenal. The music to the 1980s version is absolutely astounding. I mean, it's just amazing. Apparently, the screenplay for Little Shop of Horrors was written under the title, um, The Passionate People Eater. So, it's weird because things that are so iconic to us now, they have very interesting starts that I feel like we don't. Oh, obviously we don't hear about all these things, but it is very interesting to me, that there was such a evolution that happened with this particular story, and it wasn't even until a full 20 some odd years later, more than 20 years later, that it kind of took off and became part of what we now know as pop culture. And that was 20 years ago today, or 20 years ago and some change, like, so it's super interesting to me that this particular story has such staying power, because it really does.
You know what other story has great staying power?
What's that?
Okay, it's not really a great transition, but my number 3.
3. Yeah, you're at number 3.
My number 3. Whew. Okay, my number 3. There was a remake of it, so
Oh, same as
that's
Little
that.
Shop of Horrors.
Same as Little Shop of Horrors. Interesting
Mhm.
how we both did that. But mine is not Little Shop of Horrors. Mine is a movie starring another iconic, and I do mean iconic,
Mhm.
incredibly iconic star of the 60s, Jerry Lewis.
Hmm.
You can't
I
talk
was
comedy
hoping
of the 1960s without Jerry Lewis.
Yeah, I was hoping you were gonna put a Jerry Lewis, movie in here because I didn't, and I feel like that should be a synonymous sort of piece. You shouldn't even have a list of the '60s comedies without having some Jerry Lewis.
Now, the problem became, which 1960s Jerry Lewis comedy would I
There are
use?
many.
Would it be The Ladies' Man, which I think, at least in speaking more, because I did add Ladies' Man to my list, I just realized. Um, by the way, great set pieces in The Ladies' Man. Cinderfella, The
Mm.
Bellboy. No, I went with, like I said, the one that got remade. Um,
And not It's a Mad, 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 Mad World.
and it's not as mad, 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 mad. Um,
He was just in it for a cameo there, so.
but I will say this: remember when we did we do lists of movies based on things that are not it? I don't remember.
That are
If we
not
haven't, we
it.
should. Well, when like a 10 things I hate about you is Taming of the Shrew. Um, it takes the story, but it makes something sort of new out of it.
Oh, no, we didn't do that, but we were going to. That was a plan, but we didn't actually do it.
Well, this would fall under that list heading as well because it's The Nutty Professor, a
Ah.
humorous take on the Jekyll and Hyde story, even though it
So
has a lot less killing.
so remake wise, Nutty Professor was sort of not memorialized, made popular to current generations or, generations sort of post 1960s by Eddie Murphy.
Yes. And I
Yes.
would say to current generations, probably haven't seen either.
Right, right. Yeah. I was trying to walk that line and didn't quite make it, but yeah.
It's like, you know what? The difference in time between the first Nutty Professor and the remake is probably, I think it's right around the same amount of time between the remake and now.
Hmm.
So it we might be in line for another Nutty Professor movie.
Same thing with Little Shop of Horrors.
Yeah, but they can't
Same
beat
amount
the
of
older
time.
version.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
Oh yeah. Okay, sorry.
Suddenly see. Anyway, the Nutty Professor. I spent enough time on rambling on about nothing in particular. By the way, if you want to hear me do that for 30 straight minutes, the most recent episode of the podcast is all that. So check that out. So the Nutty Professor, Jerry Lewis, who I mentioned is in this movie, is Professor Julius F. Kelp, and he's a nerd, more or less. But he invented this concoction that made him cool, made him sophisticated. Think Steve Urkel versus Stefan Urkel, right? That's that's the difference between Professor Kelp and Buddy Love right there.
So funny.
Buddy Love is the alter ego, and now mind you, there are some elements in this movie, like Signs of the Times, I guess, um, that you know his relationship with Miss Purdy might not be so cool. these days, right? And just him being like this ultra cool professor that, you know, digs hanging out with young ladies. It might be a little frowned upon by, you know, the office staff in the 21st century. But watching the transformation take place between Kelp and Buddy Love, it's done in a way that, I mean, let's face it, if Jerry Lewis couldn't do it, nobody else except maybe Dick Van Dyke could do it.
Yeah.
It is an extremely funny movie. But again, it with 21st century hindsight might, you know, send some of the wrong messages, especially at the spoilers at the end when it all comes down to, he has to be himself, right? That's what it's all about. Be yourself, except hiding the extra bottle of Buddy Love juice um, behind her back as they walk away. It's like, be yourself until she wants you to be somebody else. You know, might be a little bit on the sketch side. But when it comes to physical comedy, Jerry Lewis has it in spades. That's it's nothing to take away from his. Let's see. Kente pops in and says hello. Hey, Kente. That's not to take away from Jerry Lewis's ability to deliver jokes, but I mean, let's face it. As funny as he will always be remembered as the physical comedian
Yes.
over mental witticisms or punchy punchlines. His facial reactions, his falling down. Jerry Lewis does a great job portraying both characters because it almost seems like that he's playing himself twice. Kind of weird statement to make, I know, but think of it this way: Professor Kelp is his acting persona, right? It's it's the bumbler. It's the guy that kind of doesn't get taken seriously. But in reality, when Jerry Lewis wasn't on, as it were, he was a pretty cool hip cat. You would see him when he's not performing, just, hey, I'm just hanging out. You can't expect me to fall down all the time. And Jerry Lewis was in reality a man of duality, depending on whether or not he was performing. And I know for some, you saw him as either one of those two things because they didn't really cross. You're either in the lounge or you're falling down the stairs, but the stairs never fall down into the lounge. The Nutty Professor, because it was directed by Jerry Lewis, it is, I don't know, it feels like he's exercising those both parts of himself in this one movie to, well, I don't know what the intent would be, but he, as the director, showcases both sides of him in spectacular fashion. Jerry Lewis will never get enough credit for being an actor. Even with a couple of his sad roles, he just what was the joke in the 80s and early 90s? Oh, Jerry Lewis, he's big in France, right? Because he falls down. The French love slapstick. That was the running joke in when I was growing up. But if you actually watch him and appreciate good performance, the Nutty Professor does both of these jobs very well, highlighting his abilities as a physical performer, but also showcasing his maybe even truer, just normal guy side. And maybe Buddy Love is supposed to be the coolest cat in town, but I think he only seems that way because of the extreme uncoolness of the other character. I think Buddy Love kind of falls right in the middle, and for some reason, normal guy with slick back hair, does it for the ladies in this movie.
Well, the Nutty Professor is a take on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yes.
So I mean, it's kind of it's timeless, and the tale itself is it's an old kind of idea, but I have to agree. There's something about Jerry Lewis that the physical expressions that he makes are just it's what makes him who he is. It's why he was so funny. His everything that he does is so exaggerated that it's hard not to feel like it's hilarious. And you're right. I think
And
the only
timing.
yes, and timing. The only person that kind of fits within that realm is Dick Van Dyke. They both have that same, and they're both different. They're different in terms of what they bring to the screen, but they both have that they have an exaggerated sense of where they are in time and space and how that can be portrayed on camera. And it's absolutely amazing to see.
Yeah, yeah. And they're also both of them far better actors than they'll ever be remembered for.
I have to agree, which is sad in some ways, but um the body of work that they leave behind sort of speaks for itself, for sure.
And I suppose if you can't be remembered as an Olivier, you might as well be remembered for like the not just king, but like the emperor of a very specific type of comedy that will uh, stand the test of time forever.
I often feel the same way about Don Knotts. Like there was something about who the Don Knotts persona was that just carried across the screen in a way that was just so different from any other actor.
Well, what do you fight fire with? Water.
Oh God.
No, you fight fire with fire. Sorry, that was my Don Nuts.
I just yeah. Yeah. Anyway. Okay, so moving on to my number 2.
Yes, Nutty Professor was my number 3. Moving on.
Okay, so my number 2. My number 2 is a movie that starred Jack Lemmon, Walter Matthau, and the two of them together made for the oh man, I just love this movie. It actually spawned a TV sitcom by the same name. And the comedy was written by this man named Neil Simon. Neil Simon is probably one of the most prolific writers of the 60s into the 70s and beyond. Just an amazing writer. Um, But this particular movie came about based on his play called The Odd Couple. Now, as humor goes, I this, as humor goes, this film definitely encapsulates the 1960s in a way that few other movies really do. First of all, there's the location, which is sort of perfect. You know, it's big city. Um, there's a lot going on with the odd couple. Um, one is kind of a perfectionist and a neat freak, and the other is your, I don't know, everyday slob. Somebody who really just doesn't put a lot of effort and emphasis into, let's say, personal hygiene and, environmental care. Um, it's sort of a I feel like this is a love letter to the duality of who we are as humans. Um, we all have the capacity to be both of these people, and when either side gets to be too much, this is what we become. We become the caricature um, of either Felix. Um, well, let me just take a moment and say that the Felix character, more than the Oscar character, is one of the sort of like hated characters because he is such a perfectionist and because he's such a clean freak and because he's so neat and tidy. And that, I think, has a great deal to do with their living arrangement because they're roommates. And so it almost feels like Felix takes on the role of being the domesticated woman of the apartment. I feel like Felix got a lot of hate for that, but it was silly because that wasn't what it was supposed to be about. Oscar, on the other hand, gets a lot of, oh yeah, it's just a guy being a guy. But in all honesty, the thing that makes it funny is the dichotomy between the two of them. There is this crazy juxtaposition between Felix and Oscar, and the comedy comes from the tension because they just simply cannot see from each other's point of view. There's some really serious stuff that the Odd Couple tackles, which is great. Um, it has to do with, Felix being separated from his wife and contemplating going through a divorce. He's basically on the verge of suicide when he first uh, kind of gets to New York. Um, and Oscar is very set in his own ways. And he sort of doesn't see anything wrong with the way that he lives. Um, they real th- this idea is such a good idea because it just creates the kind of comedic tension that will always be funny. Whether you filmed this today or back in the 60s, um the amount of comedic tension will basically be the same. You'll use different props and you'll have different sort of, ideas for how you portray Felix and Oscar. But honestly, these human traits are just sort of universal. And everybody can understand that tension between keeping things very neat and tidy and organized and alphabetized in some fashion, um, and the complete opposite, which is just the absolute slob. And hey, I don't really care about my physical environment. So anyway, this particular movie ranks so high on my on my list of love for 1960s comedies because, one, it feels timeless, but two, the performance by Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau, who apparently they did a remake, not a remake, they did a sequel. I didn't see it, but they did a sequel. Um, is is one of those. It's the kind of performance where they play off of each other so well that it's hard to believe that it's not really happening. There's just something about the chemistry between the two of them that's just so perfect. It's almost as perfect as the TV series The Odd Couple, um, which also was absolutely astounding. I mean, like, you couldn't have picked better people to also work off of that. But I love how funny this is because it is such real human drama. It's this is the stuff that kind of makes us who we are. Um, it's not Jekyll and Hyde, but it is very much that, sort of like if you can't find a happy medium, this is what you get. You get people on both opposite sides of the spectrum. It's really an amazing movie. So I highly recommend seeing once. Um, it it definitely has some kind of magic to it, which I know we say this a lot, but they just don't make movies like this anymore. And it really is worth kind of watching a more I hate to say vintage, but it is kind of a vintage look back at what comedy used to be like. And honestly, anytime that you get a chance to see something written by or developed by Neil Simon, don't hesitate, because everything that he has done has pretty much been gold beyond gold standard. So, my number two choice is The Odd Couple.
It is a wonderful choice. Almost made my list because I am a fan. I've seen the movie, I've seen the show, and I've seen stage production. Also very good.
Oh, that's right. There is a stage production of this. I totally forgot.
And I'm the one that brought it up this time.
Nice. Very, very nice.
I'm cultured.
Yes. I mean, was that ever actually in doubt? Which one are you? Are you Oscar or are you Felix?
I'm Oscar all day.
Yeah?
Except I'm not into sports.
Okay. I guess
He
that
was a
makes
sports
sense.
guy.
Yeah, that's right. He's the sports writer.
So yeah, and let's not forget that it spawned the phrasing popularizing odd couple. So when people are mismatched, like, oh, that's an odd couple, huh? Yeah.
I think I think also one of the reasons that I really love this movie is because it normalized at a time when we weren't normalizing this at all. This sort of uh, behavior between two men, which I mean, they obviously are not like, romantic with each other or anything like that. As far from that as you can possibly get. But it sort of normalized the relationship between these two men that was um it was just different. You didn't see a lot of this. It was always, you always have the eligible bachelor living on their own. You always have having the roommate situation. Really, it changed the whole dynamic, and it sort of, again, it just normalized this conversation around, hey, this is how people live, which I also really, really loved. Absolutely.
And let's not forget it also normalized, you know, Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau spending the next 40 years making movies together.
Oh, no kidding. And, just a shout out to, well, Jack Lemmon, of course, because, yes, absolutely. But a shout out to Walter Matthau, who has been just a constant, again, kind of not quite the same as Adam West, but just a constant presence in movies and television. Just an amazing career of all kinds of different acting pieces, which are so underrated in some ways. He also has amazing comedic talent. If you watch Grumpy Old Men and you don't find that funny, I don't know what to tell you. Um, it's so his humor is just so great. There's something about his timing that is just so hilarious.
See, now I need to do a marathon of just watching these two guys play off each other.
Oh man. Yeah, it's a sight to behold, honestly. It really is. And as a young man, Walter Matthau uh, actually has sort of always looked like an old man, but it worked. It just absolutely worked, and it sort of made his whole career like he was perfect for all the roles that he played in. Just absolutely perfect. I have to say, this is not by no means is this my favorite Walter Matthau film, but it is just so iconic in my head because my kids watched this movie so many times that I'm pretty sure that we like wore grooves in the DVD. My kids used to love Dennis the Menace, and Walter Matthau as Mr. Wilson was just he was so funny. I mean, he was really funny. So, but I think still my favorite is either Grumpy Old Men or when he played in the Bad News Bears. The coaches of the Bad News Bears was just he was hilarious. Just that kind of like not just I'm it's not just that he's angry, it's that he's got the ability to play off of other people in a way that I think is kind of rare. Um, and he just picks it up. But same thing with Jack Lemmon. Jack Lemmon oftentimes plays the more understated role rather than the overstated role. And yeah, the two of them together just make it work. So amazing.
Now there's what was it called? I'm pretty sure it was the two. Now I gotta look it up. What the movie I'm thinking of is. Maybe I'll be able to come up with it as I'm just kind of meandering about in conversation land. Just idly saying words as I also um, take a
also
look
just
at.
Also, just to give you some idea. Okay, so he was 79 when he died, but Walter Matthau was born in 1920. So that I mean, when you think about all the things that these actors have seen, it's unbelievable. Just unbelievable.
My fellow Americans. That's what I was thinking of.
My fellow Americans.
The Jack Lemmon, James Garner, Dan Aykroyd
Right.
movie from the '90s. And I remember very specifically, it's like his campaign phrase was, "Don't change horses in midstream." So yeah, there's so many lists that could be brought up just from Jack Lemmon, Walter Matthau.
Oh, no kidding. And great ones too. I mean, the two of them just had storied history.
Speaking of stories, how about my number two?
Go ahead.
My number two has already been mentioned once tonight
No.
because it was on your list.
Aha.
Crossover, but you had it at number 10.
I was afraid that that was going to happen. And
Oh, it happened.
I did say that I really wished that I could have put it higher.
Because if you did, I would have been prevented from rambling on like an idiot for the next minute. No, no. My number two is Doctor Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. Now, the thing about this movie, other than being just one of the greatest movies ever made, in my humble opinion, it's possibly my favorite Kubrick film. The thing is, it was made in the '60s. Now, if you've seen it and you're like curious as to why that matters, think about it. It's made in the '60s, and it's like a total, you know, uh, words. Dang it! It's
Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh at you, Josh.
no, it's okay.
Ah.
The hours of the day are starting to creep up on me. It is a send off on the Cold War and how, well, more or less, we're all doomed because everything's run by morons. Um, that's everything on the face anyway. That's it was the '60s. It's taking a very serious and dire situation and sort of turning it on its head to reveal truth, but as you would see in Spinal Tap years later, turning it to 11. You know, that's one of the the absolute keys of making not just successful comedy, but timeless comedy, brilliant comedy. It has to have the truth, because you're holding the powers that be accountable while informing the public that this is what's going on, but you're doing it in a way that's, to steal a phrase from one of your movies, all of this awful stuff going on in the world, and then layering it with a spoonful of sugar.
There you go.
In the world of Doctor Strangelove, it is bleak is an understatement, but it also doesn't play off that way, because everybody's in a generally decent enough mood that they're not feeling the effects of the end of the world. Mostly because the ones that are planning it are pretty safe and saying things like you can't fight in here. It's the war room. It is a comedy that doesn't, contrary to a lot of my selections tonight, doesn't rely heavily on physical comedy, but it relies heavily on satirical wit and being contrarian to itself. Now you're probably wondering, hey, what does that mean? How does something contrarian to oneself? Well, it sets up a worst case scenario, and rather than embrace it, the characters embrace it, right? They're not. It's to going through a whole lot of denial. In fact, it's basically what all the stages of grief, right?
Yeah.
Where, oh, that's not happening, and then people get angry, and then finally, yep, this is happening. So let's figure out how we're going to repopulate, and it's all done in an extraordinarily humorous fashion. It's a bit of talent that Kubrick, if you look at his extensive body of work, you don't really attribute to him, right? Kubrick is not the guy that you're like, he's a comedy genius.
No, definitely not.
But he is such a great artist. Let's go ahead and use that word. He's such a great artist that when he does do it, it is amazing. And there were, I believe, index cards, I want to say, found at the time of his death, where he was planning a sequel to Doctor Strangelove. And I don't know if a sequel would have been, the best of ways for him to pop back into that, realm of comedy. But I would have given almost anything to be able to see him end with a starkly truthful but utterly hilarious view of the times of the times at the time. It's kind of like saying, I would love to hear what George Carlin says about what it's like right now.
Mm,
You know,
I wouldn't.
Now he'd probably just go, "You woke me up for this? No, I'm going back."
Hmm. Also, yeah, no. Okay, anyway. Moving right along.
The point is, as my microphone falls over, the point is, Doctor Strangelove is, again, in my opinion, not just a great comedy, not just a great film. It is just one of the best things captured on film ever. And it's Stanley Kubrick on doing comedy the way comedy is supposed to be done, by being honest and showing the world something that maybe it didn't want to see, but also making it palatable. That's why Doctor Strangelove is my number two.
Good choice. Good choice. Obviously, I really like it because, yeah.
I mean, you don't
Uh,
like it as much as me,
Also
but
made my list too. Um, okay. I'm gonna move without ado to my number one. My number one movie probably doesn't really need a whole lot of exposition, except I will say that this particular movie is built off of. Okay, so it's got a kind of long history. I don't know if any of you know the story of Pygmalion, right? But the story of Pygmalion is basically a sculptor falls in love with his own sculpture, and it's kind of, I mean, it's not kind of based, it is based on a Greek mythology story. it I don't want to call it a myth because it doesn't exactly have all of the trappings of, but it's part of mythology. um However, one of the things about Pygmalion that is always interesting to me is the sculptor that falls in love with his statue, basically falls in love with his statue because he swore off of women completely and said, okay, I'm just going to be celibate for the rest of my life, because he saw something with a prostitute that somehow scarred him for life. And, now I'm in 2024 and I'm looking back at this going, good Lord, could we just stop, please? I fan having these crazy ideas about men who feel as if women are somehow, either the devil or the root of all evil or the reason that all of these bad things happen. And it took me a while to sort of come to grips with the idea of Pygmalion as being the ridiculousness of how men idolize women, so much so that they just absolutely cannot sort of get past the idea that perfection is the only thing that matters. And then women take it and go, no, no, this is, I'm not your picture. I am a person. And that's sort of what happens in Pygmalion. A little bit different, but okay. So then George Bernard Shaw comes along. And George Bernard Shaw, when he writes this particular story called Pygmalion, he his play is such an interesting sort of idea, and it gains a lot of traction. Eventually, George Bernard Shaw's story of Pygmalion turns into the musical, which is My Fair Lady. And the reason that I say that all that stuff as sort of like the background is because My Fair Lady is absolutely hilarious, made funny by the wonderful Katharine Hepburn, who I will always, always have the deepest amount of respect for. I just absolutely love her screen presence and the fact that she was such a force to be reckoned with. Now, the music in My Fair Lady is fairly legendary. It just, I mean, you'll hear it in places if you watch the movie, and you'll know that you've heard this music before. The character that she plays is Eliza Doolittle, and Eliza is the she is the perfect character, or I'm sorry, she's the perfect person for this world of men, who really can only see her for what she kind of brings to the table in terms of her own perfection. But it's it's totally mismatched because she makes all kinds of mistakes at all times, and that's where all the funny stuff kind of comes in. Um, but the story of My Fair Lady, which I think is like one of the best, is it's hilarious, but underneath it, um there's such a 60s wrestle with women's equality, with uh with this kind of gender affirming self-esteem that is, you can't put me in a box simply because I'm a woman. I can look a certain way, but that doesn't mean I'm going to be this way. There's something just so brilliant about Katharine Hepburn's performances. I will say that the costume design is one of my most favorite parts of My Fair Lady, aside from the fact that it's just, there's something so almost insidiously funny about their performance. But I think also one of the reasons that this made it to my number one is that it is so iconic of the way that we were looking at roles between the genders in the 1960s. And when I look back on it now, as much as I can appreciate both the music, I'm so sad actually that the music was not more, that there wasn't something more to it. I mean, it's great music, but I also feel like, there it should have been a bigger part. Um, but there's something that sort of everything about My Fair Lady encapsulates what I have come to sort of understand about the uh, crescendo of the 1960s altogether. There, there are class pieces in here. There are, it's all about gender for sure. Um, there are a lot of, I think, this kind of epic struggle between what was the important part of being um, a woman and how that translated into the quote unquote man's world, and how other women treated her, how other women treated Eliza, who is the main character. Um, it definitely all kind of comes together. And what I was going to say about her wardrobe, the costuming, over the course of the film, it changes. It changes from the very beginning to sort of like the central uh, climax of the actual story itself, and then begins to taper back down again. And you can really see a whole narrative structure in the movie through just her costuming. And that is that's just like, the attention to detail was just absolutely wonderful. Really, really, really wonderful. Um, uh, Pretty much everything by George Bernard Shaw is pretty amazing. I mean, as a playwright, he just sort of had all the right stuff together. But there's something at this point now, when we look back on this, it makes you feel really happy that we have come as far as we have, but it also makes you realize that the struggle continues, because this is, and that's why I brought up Pygmalion in the first place, this is not something that has gone away. We still struggle with the same things. And as funny as My Fair Lady is, as great as some of the lines are, with her, um, is- I mean, one of my favorite lines in this is sort of her saying that um, well, I'm not going to say the line right because I can't remember exactly how it goes, but basically it's like, the difference between being a lady and the flower girl is how she's treated. So, and it comes from, she's a flower girl at one point because she's selling flowers on the street, and then she gets turned into this amazing woman, and nothing about her has really changed. It's just the way that other people treat her that has changed. And I find that to be like so incredibly satisfying sitting here in 2024 watching what was happening in the 1960s as a wow, we've really come a long way, but wow, we still have so far to go. Because the lessons of My Fair Lady have not really resolved themselves. We still struggle with the same things. So, my number one choice, My Fair Lady. I feel like this movie has sort of been on top lists for a long time. I'm really glad that we got to talk about it. I just absolutely love this movie. So, number one, My Fair Lady.
Naturally, I'm thinking about My Fair. And by the way, hey Brandon, talking to us in the chat. Naturally, thinking about My Fair Lady is going to be for me going back to the music because it
Yes.
is wonderful, wonderful music.
Yes, and this
Um,
is also another one that gets done often. Like we were talking about Little Shop of Horrors. It really does. A lot of people do My Fair Lady. A lot of theater groups do My Fair Lady.
and it's a challenge. Um,
Yeah.
it's very much a challenge to be able to emulate all of that. It's you got to have some chops to pull off some of
Yeah,
those numbers.
there's a range that's required to play the role of Eliza, um, a vocal range, which yeah, I don't have. There's a reason that I only sing in the shower.
Well, it's time for my number one,
Really
right?
excited. Let's hear it.
Well, if you know me, then you should be pretty obvious what it is.
Well, I can say one thing very safely because this is the 1960s. Kevin Smith will not be involved.
It is
So
Clerks.
I just had to add that in there because once per episode we must mention Kevin Smith. I'm pretty sure it's contractual at this point.
Yes, until he comes on either the podcast or even this show. Kevin Smith, we only do two people on this show, me and Jen. But if you have a list, I'll
We're
step out. You can
happy
hang out
to,
with Jen.
yes.
I'll be backstage and just like geeking out the whole
We'll
time.
we'll just we'll just do top 5 and we'll basically just let you have the floor. Go ahead.
So, my number one also comes from one of my favorite writer directors of all of the times, and he's just so gosh darn prolific. We mentioned one of his writing partners a little bit earlier when talking about Zig Van Dyke Show, Carl Reiner.
Oh, Carl Reiner.
But no, we're not talking about Carl Reiner. We're talking about Mel Brooks and his 1967 seminal classic, The Producers.
That almost made my list. I mean, that was like right on the top of my. Should I put this on the list or should I? Yeah, I'm so glad that you did.
It is absolutely wonderful. Also, you know, musically stuff. After all, where else are you gonna to see such a wonderful production about such a you know what was gonna go for a joke? Definitely not worth the soundbite.
This definitely is one of those like it was meta before the time of meta.
Yes. So the story, for those of you unaware for some reason, because it was remade and it was, it's the, not to talk about the remake, but I'm not saying it was as good as the original. I'm saying it is like great on its own in its own way.
Just
And
minus Gene Wilder.
right.
Yeah.
Um it's it's hard to explain because Matthew Broderick is legend, right?
Yeah.
But it's like it's the same thing, but they're great for Anyway, that's not the producers.
I,
Okay,
I
yes,
I know exactly where you're going with this. I absolutely feel it, and I felt very similar with Little Shop of Horrors. Like there is a way that remakes sort of work almost better than the original, but the original or the version that we know of in the 1960s definitely carries something a bit different because of the time that it was made. And I feel the same way about the producers. It has a different feel to it because the 1960s were different than Matthew Broderick's 1990s sort of, here's this is the era that we're going to recreate the producers in. So, and comedy changes. It does.
it does. And the Matthew Broderick, Nathan Lane, and Will Ferrell to a lesser extent, it is a completely triumphant tandem with those two. Um, and they just, again, I'm not saying it's better, but it is equally greatness for like if you had two columns, right? They would stand atop their own columns each
Yeah,
separately by themselves.
they run very much in parallel lines.
Yes. So with that being said, um, the producers is about a couple of guys that are like, you know what? It's almost more profitable to make a terrible Broadway show than it is a good one. Which, then they said, well, let's do that. And they take the money from the little old ladies and make what they feel is going to be the most tasteless musical of all time, which is a tribute to Adolf Hitler. Such bad, but the point being, to make all of this terrible material, and then acknowledging that it's terrible material, but then having the audience eat it up and ruining them. Like, oh, people like this. This is not great, and ends with some lessons learned and some songs sang. It is a perfect movie. I don't say that very often. I very very seldom say that, but this is one of those films that turns turns its world on its head and makes you sit back and uh, enjoy quite the ride. Wow, I'm just talking nonsense here. As we've said, Gene Wilder is wonderful. Um, and my microphone keeps falling over. So how about I make this quick? The Producers is one of the funniest movies ever made, especially not just of the '60s, but of any era, and not just in its original format, but any format. That's right. And I want to see it on Broadway. Particularly, I want to see it on Broadway with Matthew Broderick and Nathan Lane. But I don't think it's going to happen. So I'm not really sure what new territory I can bring to talking about the producers on this show. And because it has been brought up before, we have had discussions about it before. And that's why I'm struggling. I'm like, I don't want to rehash. Like if somebody's doing a binge on 10-1, it'll just be, oh, they're having the same conversation about the producing.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. I guess in a manner of speaking, if we're talking about in terms of the time it was made, the '60s, Mel Brooks, always known for kind of pushing the envelope when it comes to taste of the times. He does as always, an exceptional job of being risque, but not straight up raunch. He does a great job of making his characters um, not stupid, but maybe just a little dim for comic effect, and gives them their little idiosyncrasy foibles that uh, really make them stand out because what was it, the bit about the blanket that makes this just mild mannered normal guy suddenly break down, and it's hilarious. That's probably Mel Brooks's greatest gift to us as an audience is giving us characters that are people and not just uh, stereotypes or tropes.
Right.
And he takes the mold and tosses it aside because he doesn't deal with those characters. And if you see stuff happening after you know Mel Brooks does something, it's because he changed the way it's done. Uh, a good not to go off on another huge tangent, but another good example of this, and it's something super simple. In the '90s, we had Robin Hood Men in Tights, and that was right around the time of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, with Kevin Costner, and Carrie Elwes had a line, um, and it's so simple, but it's so brilliant, where he says, "Unlike other Robin Hoods, I can speak with an English accent." It's just, I mean, it's such a small thing. It's like maybe this British guy should talk British. Well, how do you do that? Well, we can get a British guy to play him. Huh, interesting. And suddenly that's didn't think of that. Uh, and that's what makes Mel Brooks comedy great. It's because he takes what should be obvious and then makes you go, shouldn't this be obvious? And then cracks a joke at it, and it's hilarious. So the producers is my number one. I hope I uh, dug myself out of that hole pretty well. Um, and I- if you have anything to add about the producers, feel free to hop in because I love this movie.
I'm just gonna say that the producers first of all, it is extremely iconic to the Mel Brooks brand. Um, and everything that kind of comes after the producers makes you reflexively look back at it and go, oh, yeah, I see where some of these things sort of took off from. I thought the same thing when I watched Spaceballs, and I felt like, oh, I see where some of this came from. Remember in the producers? There are so many. It was kind of like Mel Brooks finally got to spread his wings, and we got to see the full glory of what he was capable of with the producers. And he wasn't afraid to be controversial, which I think is one of those things that now we definitely have issues with because we are all afraid to be very controversial. And, for good reasons. I'm not getting into why or why we shouldn't. Just there is a state of being sort of in comedy right now where we don't cross certain lines. And Mel Brooks was just very much of the sort of, I don't know, mindset that it's okay. It's okay. I can laugh at this, so can you. And nothing is funny about Hitler, but the producers made everything funny about the entire setup of Springtime. What was it? Springtime with Hitler? Hitler in Springtime? Um, Springtime for
Springtime
Hitler.
for
For Hitler. There we
Hitler
go. Yeah.
and Germany. Sorry.
I mean, like the, it's hard to come up with. I know that we can all, like, right off the top, say what our favorite Mel Brooks movies were, but it's hard to come up with a movie that feels more origin bringing than the producers for Mel Brooks. Like I said, it just launched so much, uh, both for his career and really for comedy altogether. It is really easy to watch the producers in the 1960s and realize that comedy in the 60s wasn't just different. We were experiencing something different. I am using the collective we because I wasn't around either, but there was a collective sort of understanding in the 60s that it was okay to laugh at things that made us feel uncomfortable. And I feel like that's mostly what encapsulates Mel Brooks' humor, from Blazing Saddles to, Robin Hood Men in Tights, Spaceballs, whatever. It's this makes me uncomfortable, therefore I'm going to laugh at it. And the producers was definitely the very origin of that. So I absolutely loved the producers, by the way. Truly amazing.
So yeah, we did the list thing.
All right. Well, I'll go through my list and then you can go through your list and I will explain what we are going to do for next week because I got something exciting on the horizon here.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I think you're going to like it because you're going to be like, ooh, this opens up the door to all kinds of good stuff. So, yeah.
I like
Gonna...
that way of thinking.
All right. So, going through my list. Number 10, Dr. Strangelove. Number 9, The Parent Trap. Number 8, The Pink Panther. Number 7, The Fearless Vampire Killers. Sorry. Number 6, Mars Needs Women. Number 5, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. Number 4, Mary Poppins. Number 3, Little Shop of Horrors. Number 2, The Odd Couple. And number 1, My Fair Lady.
Well, when it comes to my top 10, before I get into my list, I just want to clarify something to everybody that's listening out there in Radio Land. I said Radio Land. I said the words.
It's okay. We know that that's actually where your mind is at. You are actually, or you're a reincarnated, old-timey radio announcer. Well, I think we all know that. Yep.
Just us. No. This just in. The Kaiser's on the move. So, for those of you that aren't frequent listeners to the show, there comes a point in time during the show, because for me, it's always like a late, day, that I just like hit a wall, right?
Mm-hmm.
You'll start hearing me going, that is so
because we keep him up so late, that's why.
And all of you are worth it, I promise. But the idea, not the idea. See, I start rambling incoherently, and my notes are very minuscule because I like to, speak from the heart, if you will. The point I'm trying to get to is, if you hear me slurring words or kind of trail off, I'm not drunk and I'm not having a stroke, I don't think. And I'm perfectly okay. I've been asked a couple of times, man, are you okay? I heard the show. I'm like, no, I'm fine. It's just
he's not drinking.
Like, I got up at 3:00 this morning, and that was well, if you're watching live, that was a long freaking time ago, about 20 hours. 19 hours. See, I can't even math
it's
right
a
now.
long time.
It's a long time. So this
Yes.
day was even longer than usual because I usually get up around 4. So I just wanted to point that out for those that might be concerned that, hey, I think the guy in this podcast is having a stroke. Now, unless that'll make you tell your friends. And
Hey, go listen
yeah,
to this guy have a stroke on air. It's amazing. No, we don't
this,
actually. No, no. I would never. No, no. I wouldn't let you do that to yourself, Josh.
so Jen does check in, like before we go to her, she's like, you okay to do this? And I'm always like, yeah, I can do it. And then right before we go to air, I'm like, okay, Jen, how about I hit record? Then the live button goes on, and I'm like, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Then the intro plays and it immediately wakes you up really, really
Yes.
just out of a cold, dead sleep. And yeah, then it kind of all sort of,
Yeah, at the
slow.
90-minute mark, I'm like, so I just wanted to offer that brief explanation before I get, and the microphone falling over is not really not doing it for me. But I just wanted to offer that brief explanation. So yeah, doing a little slurring there. So my
Nice.
top 10,
All right.
number 10, The Ladies Man, Jerry Lewis, number 1. Number 9, How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. That's sorely underrated musical. People need to really check that one out. Number 8, Bells Or Ringing, another like underrated gem. Number 7, Charade. Number 6, It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. Mad World. Not that Mad World. Number
Different
5,
Mad World.
The Beatles, A Hard Day's Night. Number 4, Batman, but from 1966. So Batman. Number 3, The Nutty Professor from Laven. Number 2, Doctor Strangelove or and number 1, The Producers. Now, Jen, I'm ready for my homework.
All
Give it
right.
to me, Peach.
Okay. This is going to be kind of an easy one to go research. It might be a little bit harder in terms of, hey, which ones have I seen and how do I fit these all into a list? But our homework for this week is to come up with 10 movies that have been nominated for Best Picture by the Academy of Motion Pictures and Science. Um, they don't have to have won. They just need to have been nominated. So you can start back as early as 1927. And I mean, if you've seen The Racket, then super awesome. I'm super excited for you. But if you haven't, skip ahead a couple of decades, and I'm sure that there are some on your list that you have seen. So don't expect you to, know every single one. But there are some great resources out there to give you an idea of which films were nominated, and then it's just a matter of going through to find the ones that you've seen and then prioritize them.
Well, it just so happens I have a full list here from letterbox.com.
Sweet.
601 nominated films for Best Picture.
Uh, I mean, some of these I feel like I could probably make some fairly good predictions, but I also feel like anybody who knows me could make an excellent prediction about what my favorite movies are from this list too. So I think it's going to make an interesting list. I really do.
Now I'm going to sort it by my highest rated films first so I can skip only to the ones that I've seen. And wow, I have seen a lot of Oscar nominated movies.
It really does create a nice pool to choose from because most people watch the Oscar nominated films for whatever that particular year is, not just because they're popular, but also because they get a lot of critical acclaim. So you tend to be a little bit more interested in, a movie uh, for whatever era you're watching it in. More people saw, I'm sure more people saw um, Driving Miss Daisy than saw, My Left Foot. Both were nominated, but Driving Miss Daisy won, and so a lot of people watched it. So there's that kind of stuff.
Okay. Wow. This is
It's a
wow.
big list. It is a big list. There are usually no less than 5 or 6 movies that are nominated every single year for Best Picture. So, you've got a big depth of choices here to make.
601.
There you go.
I'm not sure what the exact number I've seen is.
I mean, in
I'm on page
2010, there were
2.
10 movies that were nominated for Best Picture.
Oh, I can count real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,
Okay,
11,
now
12,
Now, let me put a
13.
caveat. Let me put a caveat on this, okay? Because I feel like this is important. I'm not asking you to put together a list of which movies you found to be like, okay, well, these were, what I think were the best movies of this category. I'm saying which were your favorites. So this is you personally, Josh, telling us, the viewers, the listeners, what you found to be the most enticing, the most compelling films from this list. This is what Josh likes. So it's not, I'm not saying like prioritize which of these films you think is the best of the best of the best with honors, sir. I'm saying this is just what you think are the best films.
Right. And I won't even go by my own like ratings. I've seen 148 of them.
Wow. Yeah.
So
That's good.
because if I went in just like order of the order on my letterbox list, it starts by sorting by my rating. I have all my 5-star movies first, which are in like I guess release order.
Mm-hmm.
Because so it's these movies have 5 stars, but it's also in the order they were released. So uh, I that's not how you make a list like this, because sometimes I do like a 4-star movie more than a 5-star movie, not because
Right.
it's you know better made. It's just something maybe I'll enjoy watching more again, whatever the case may be.
Aliens to me only gets a, and that was not actually, I'm just using this as an example. It wasn't actually nominated for an Academy Award, but Aliens to me is only like maybe 3.5-star movie, but in terms of do I love it? It gets a 5-star rating because I'll watch Aliens over almost any other movie that is playing at any time just because I love that movie so much. It's just I know that there are technical aspects of the movie that don't quite work. There's some plot holes or some whatever. So I don't rate them the same way. But when it comes to what do I like? What does Jen like? Yeah, Aliens would make the top of a list. Absolutely.
Okay, so yeah, this I have this list of 148 movies that I need to pare down to 10. Um, yeah, you were right. This is you know the idea is super simple. Oscar nominated favorite movies um, for Best Picture, but then you look at all of these movies that you've watched, and you're like, oh wow, there are a lot of really great movies.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and how do you choose between them to pair a list of your top 10? It's definitely going to be an interesting curation process. So, I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Then once again, you've just picked a category where I'm not allowed to bring up Kevin Smith.
Sorry. I swear I didn't think about that, but yeah,
Well,
okay.
you know
We'll bring
what?
him
You know
up
what?
somehow.
Um, I already know how to bring him up, but I don't want to put that movie on the list.
Okay.
So, mind if I just go ahead and throw that one out there?
Yeah.
Good Will Hunting, produced by Kevin Smith.
Oh, there you
Boom,
go.
done,
There you go.
done, son. But I'm not putting it on my list.
I think there are so many movies to this list that it's going to be a challenge to come up with just what your top 10 are. But therein lies the beauty of the list cuz will really pare down what you think are like the greatest movies.
The beauty of the challenge is the simplicity.
Exactly. Yeah. So, with that being said, this has been a wonderful night. Thank you so much, Josh. I've had a great time. I am going to go ahead and do my own promo this week and say if you are looking for recipes that go along with any of the, no, not really, because none of the movies that are on our list tonight actually have a recipe over at moviesandmeals.com, but maybe they will inspire one. I would love to do a little shop of horrors themed dinner. I got to think about that one. Anyway, if you are looking for some recipes to go along with your favorite movie night, hey, head on over to moviesandmeals.com and I guarantee you will find something that will make you go, that sounds delicious. Moviesandmeals.com. And if you want to hear what Josh has going on, yes, Josh, take the Wadco Media section of our promo piece out.
All right. If you want to know what I'm up to, go to wadcomedia.com where you'll find all the latest and greatest stuff from Wadco Media, including places you can listen to the podcast or even more of this wonderful show, 10 to 1. I don't think there's going to be a wadcast this week because I believe I'm going to a show Friday night, but I'm not sure.
Nice.
Because for those of you that don't live in the Jacksonville area, you might be surprised to know that this Saturday is the launch of Wadco Media's first zine. That's right. It's officially a Wadco Media thing. And I have like what amounts to 500 pieces of paper. Well, not pieces of paper. 250 pieces of paper printed on both sides, which is 500 sides of paper, all ready to go to put together the first run of said zine, School Paper. It has its own Facebook page and everything, so check out School Paper. I'm very proud of this, especially because the first 3 pieces, it's not just me writing like under different names, I promise. We have a wonderfully talented musician named Seth Holden write about his journey to doing shows and how he got to this point he's at now. It's called Milestones. It's a wonderful read. I wrote a piece about seeing Rambler Kane live and the live album that he released of that night and the memories that it invoked. Because, as I said, how do you write a review about a live album you attended the recording of without talking about that night? And I couldn't do it. So I wound up talking about the night and people I reconnected with, the people that I connected with for the first time. It's a whole thing. And a friend of the Wadcast, Royce Freeman, you might know him as the guy that runs Freeman Films, gave us a piece on the closing of our only independent theater in Jacksonville. It hasn't closed yet, but it will be within the next couple of months. And it's a shame because that's where I saw myself perform on the big screen for the first time. And they were always very strong advocates for our local film community here in Duval County and Jacksonville and just the entire area. So a sad day for that, but a good time for Royce to give us a piece of his mind when it comes to that subject. And all of this is the first issue of School Paper. Can you believe it? It's only the first, and we're coming out swinging hard.
Nice.
So $2 available Saturday. Just look up the City Bus print. That's our label. Charlie Shuck is publishing for us with his City Bus print label. And give them a follow on Facebook and Instagram. Give School Paper a follow, and you'll get all of the instructions you need to go pick up the first issue this Saturday. And if you're one of the first 10 people to buy a copy of school paper, you will receive one of the first 10 copies of school paper. Guaranteed. And if you're
That's so exciting.
if you pick a if you're one of the people that picks it up after that, you will also, guaranteed to receive your copy. But you won't have that bragging right. So yeah, that's everything going on in my. Well, wait, no, it's not, because of course, right now it is May 29th. May 31st is the last day of school. You know what that means? That means this guy is going on hiatus from the day job, which means I'll have more time for the night job, and I'll actually be able to get rest now. So it's been a struggle bus to the finish line. I promise. It's so happy to see it coming to an end. The school year, that is, and look forward to having some much needed time off and some much needed sleep. I tell you, my annual tradition, I have a couple of them when it comes to the end of the school year. One, I blast the soundtrack to a Goofy movie because it is the ultimate summer vacation movie. No one will convince me differently. It had no right in the world to go as hard as it does, especially with the music, and it is amazing. So I think if I get a chance, I'm going to find somewhere out in public with like an electrical outlet. I have a little projector, and I'm just going to screen it somewhere randomly. So there's that. And the other tradition I have is, and it's a fun tradition with the kids. When I go to bed on the last day of school, not the day before, we all gather around my alarm clock and tell it to shut up. It won't be needed for 3 months, and it feels good.
My internal alarm clock will not allow me to turn off my regular alarm clock, but I'm glad that you've got that capability. That's amazing.
I didn't say it stopped me from waking up early. I just said the ceremony of it that makes it wonderful. Not
also,
so much
shout out. Honestly, shout out to Powerline, because yeah, they were one of the greatest fictional bands that we've ever had.
And by the way, God, I'm extending this show for no reason whatsoever.
You don't want to say goodbye. I get it.
One of my favorite things about a Goofy movie is, and this is going to sound dark, but if you listen to the lyrics of After Today, like just the opening couple of lines, it's like, I think Max is going to be a school shooter.
Oh God,
that's like, what is it? What are you talking about? It's like, well, think about it. What is the first thing he sings? They've been laughing since I can remember, but they're not gonna laugh anymore. It's like, that sounds messed up.
Yeah, that does actually sound very messed up.
So yeah, kind of a dark place, without the specific context of what it is. I'm gonna leave everybody on that high note.
What a note to leave us on. Thanks, Josh.
If you have any questions or comments about tonight's show, please feel free to go to the Facebook page, give it a like, 1021. Leave comments, leave suggestions, leave your top 10 list of 60s comedies. And if you want to go back into the backlog and leave your lists back there too, I'm pretty sure we'll get a notification. And you know what? I guarantee you we will take time out of the show to say, hey, Harvey Harvey's not a good name.
Harvey's a great name.
No, Weinstein ruined that.
Oh, yeah, I didn't
Jerry,
even think about that.
Jerry from Wisconsin said, talked about best friend movies. I think that was like our first episode. He said his top 10 best friend movies are this, and we'll read your list on the air, because without this show, you wouldn't be possible.
I see what you did there. I see what you did there.
So, um, I sometimes I amuse only myself, and that's okay. And
I'm easily amused, so I'm right here with you.
that's why we're a great team, Jen.
Yeah, that's exactly why.
So, with all that being said, I guess there's only one thing left to do.
Can't imagine what that is.